Welcome to Bible Study Hub. I'm Noelle. This is my beautiful mother, Ann. We're here to Bible Study Hub it up with you. We're in Daniel chapter 3 tonight. Running start. Last week we did just the first part of the fiery furnace bit, where King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, decided to create a huge idol to himself. And our boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were like, nope, not bowing down to that thing. And it goes poorly in that the king decides to throw them into a fiery furnace to kill them and to make an example out of them. And tonight we pick up in Daniel chapter 3 in verse 26. Actually, we'll start in verse 24. That'll be a little bit easier because what happens is a little bit, it's just unlikely. He throws the guys into the fire and expects them to die because the guys he sent to throw them in are already dead from the heat. And yet, what actually ends up happening is that they don't die. In verse 24, we read, King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. And last week we talked about how this very well could actually be what's called a Christophany. This would be Jesus Christ before he was incarnate on earth. It could have also been an angel, but what we know is that God sent somebody there to be with them, and he saved them. Verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door, the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Well, that was just, what a great way to get us started tonight. We end on the grand finale of this whole story, which I just absolutely love. But now that I've read all of that to you, I'd love to just back up for a moment because there's a question that you posed to me a little earlier, Mom, that I thought was just really compelling, and sort of an insightful question. You asked me if, we know God could have saved them from the fiery furnace any number of ways that he chose to. And yet, for some reason, he chose to actually show up physically in the furnace with them. Why did he choose that route? Why did he choose to physically join them in the fiery furnace? I'm curious. I'm curious what everyone has to say. If you're with us live, answer in the chat or in the comments on YouTube. We'll read them. But Mom, I'm sort of curious how you've been thinking about this.
Well, I think just, I love when God just blows my mind, which is like constantly. But when I thought about this, I just thought he didn't need to go. He didn't need to be in the fire with them. Or send an angel. We're not totally sure which one of those things it was. But either way, he didn't need to do that. He could have just simply had the 3 boys go in, not be singed, not come out smelling like smoke. The whole thing could have been completely the same, with the exception that there were just 3 of them instead of 4. So I just thought, boy, Lord, why did you choose to do it that way? I mean, you do nothing without reason and purpose. So there was a purpose, and the Bible doesn't tell us what it is. So we're just kind of like going off a little bit now on our own to say, what are the possibilities that we can think of? It's just kind of fun. Yeah. So looking forward to seeing.
I really like having that thought process, because it never actually occurred to me that, it's sort of a distinct choice relative to sort of how the rest of this goes. Like, you don't see this sort of like a physical, real, like visible person showing up next to people all that often. Here's an
Right.
interesting answer, is that God did that to bring comfort to them. And somebody
Yeah.
else says to protect them and comfort them. What is your thought on the comfort side of this?
Well, my goodness, yes. I mean, imagine how scary it would be being thrown into a fiery
Okay.
furnace. I
Yeah.
mean, the comfort would be unbelievable. Um, I like the one that's under that. It says to prove to them that God is a living God and walks with us through all our trials. I mean, how many times have we who have known the Lord and have known the story for a long, long time, where you go
Yes.
through something and you go, but Jesus is right there with me, because you
Yeah.
think of the story. It is very comforting. Someone else says
It
maybe
absolutely is.
even more of a testament for those who saw the fourth for themselves. Oh, yeah, I would sure think so. And then somebody else says to prove he is more powerful than Nebuchadnezzar's God. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
sure say so. And then similarly, to prove God is all powerful to the king. So we kind of have a dual response, and I think both are right. One is how much comfort it brought to the three boys, these young boys that were thrown into this inferno to incinerate them, and how amazing that comfort would be in the midst of that extremely terrifying experience. And then on the other side of it, to prove to this horrible king that he is powerless in comparison to the God of the universe, and
Yeah.
has no ability to accomplish what he is trying to accomplish without God's permission.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I was thinking about in, responding to this is that there are a lot of ways that God could have chosen to comfort them, and a lot of ways that he could have chosen to show his power, because obviously just bringing these guys out of the furnace alone is super powerful. Like, why the physical person? One of the things that crossed my mind is that the pagan religions, and this is even true today, their gods are not, like super physically present, right? They're these kind of, they're spirits, they're beings, they're entities. They're terrifying looking as well.
Energy.
Yeah, energy, but they don't have any personhood. There's no distinct person. One of the things that makes Christianity really interesting and unique is our belief in the Trinity, which is God eternally existing in three distinct persons. And so if this is in fact a Christophany, that word that means, Christ showing up basically in the Old Testament, how interesting would this be for Nebuchadnezzar and his men to look at this? They would not have any conception in their religion or in their sort of in their paradigms and frameworks of thinking for a personal God, and for a God who actually is with them and present with them in a in person form. Not to say that God is human, but rather that you don't have this, either just super esoteric out there entity, or one of these just horrifying, terrifying half man, half beast, gender amorphous. I mean, they're just the images of these are terrifying. You have a person who is having this personal relationship, and I think that's a huge part of why God chose to show up this way, was to really just destroy all the paradigms and frameworks that these Babylonians would have had to understand who God is. To say God is a personal God, he's a present God, and he is a powerful God. And you get
Oh
that
boy.
in the response that they have to this. Nebuchadnezzar is blown away, as you can imagine. And just I also love the completeness of the miracle. This is what we see with God always, is that when he does a miracle, he doesn't go halfway. Their clothes aren't singed, they don't even smell of smoke. And again, remember, this actually killed the guys who took them into the furnace because it was so hot. So this is just truly a miracle. But verse 29 is, oh my goodness, all of this is just funny. So one of the things that cracked me up, Mom, and you mentioned this, in verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar goes near the door and he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Mom, you made an interesting point of something that they could have said in response to that.
Noel and I were talking. I said, I'm impressed that they didn't say, no, King, you come in here. Can you
That would have
imagine
been
how that
amazing.
would, they could have been really snarky, but they weren't. They were respectful.
No.
They walked out of
Yeah.
them, or just, hey, we're really comfortable in here. Actually, we think we're going to hang out.
Chill.
Oh, can we get
Yeah.
a lemonade? Send the
We're
waiter
here.
over.
with the Messiah. So we're gonna just we're gonna wait it out for a minute until your reign is
You
over,
can't
boy.
get us. I mean, there's just so many ways this could have
I
gone.
know.
And I don't mean to, I'm not making light of the word of God or making fun of it in any way. It's real life, and I know God does have a sense of humor. And so sometimes I like to think of things like
But
that
that's
and
also
go,
sort of the theme in some ways of what we're going to be talking about today is that the way that, as a, extremely flawed human, that I want to respond to people, particularly evil
mhm,
people, particularly people
mhm.
who do not know the Lord, who do not love God, is not in line with how we consistently see these men responding to Nebuchadnezzar in particular. I mean, you've got
Yeah,
one of just the most wicked guys on the planet that you can imagine, who on numerous occasions tries to murder them and everybody. We'll get to that again in a moment as well. But their response to him consistently is just so, it's convicting to me
it's
because
gracious.
it is so gracious. We'll talk more about this in a
Yeah,
moment, but
yeah.
verse 29 as well. I mean, this gets
I love it.
Nebuchadnezzar just is all over the place with this. He just
Yeah,
constantly
I
is
was
just
laughing. I was
cursing everyone.
laughing because here's the king. And he just like he's got this play where he wants to cut people into pieces, and he can turn
Regularly.
it on a dime. So a minute ago it was, I'm going to incinerate you if you don't worship the statue. Then the next second it's, I'm going to cut you into tiny pieces and dismember you completely if you say anything bad about their God. And you just go, would you just settle down? I mean, do you have to keep trying to kill people like this?
I don't
I
know.
mean,
I guess
my
if you're the most
goodness.
powerful ruler in the known world,
Yeah,
like, why not? I guess it's sort of a dispositional thing,
it
probably.
was
It
his
favors
MO.
those.
It was
He
his
just
MO.
goes, he only has one play, and that is, I'll just murder everyone in various horrific ways. It's just like Nebuchadnezzar, you'll understand why we get why the things that are about to happen to Nebuchadnezzar. He's just not like a super wonderful person, not
Yeah,
really a
that would
guy
be
you'd want to be hanging out with.
mildly. Although he does end this chapter by promoting these three boys. Now you can
That's
understand why
true.
he might
That's
do
true.
something like that. But you just have to wonder how this settled with the Chaldeans, who are the ones responsible for getting them in big trouble. Like King Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't see that these guys weren't worshiping the
He
statue.
doesn't care.
These Chaldeans made sure he found out about it. They set
Yeah.
them up, basically. So, and because they were jealous. And now these three boys just got a big, huge promotion over the Chaldeans. So I can only imagine the Chaldeans were not super excited about how that all ended up. But I think we need to go on to chapter 4
Let's
because we have
do
a
it.
lot of material to cover in chapter 4. Noelle, before we get started, I just want to say something really quickly because we have a
Yeah.
seismic shift
This
in
is
this
important.
chapter.
Yes.
Yeah, a
Yes.
lot of chapters in the Bible, we said this many times, when the Bible was written originally, it was not written in chapters and verses. The chapter headings and how it was split up and the verse numbers were all added later, just as an organizational tool so that people could find the same passage at the same time or know where they were going. And in reality, it was just written. At this point, this is unusual because it feels like very much a chapter break. So this is going to be Nebuchadnezzar's autobiography inserted into the book of Daniel. And if you're like, oh, I don't remember what autobiography was, I used to go to the library and I've been for so long, I don't remember that section. It just simply, biography would be a story about a person's life, like a true story. Auto means about themselves. So this would be Nebuchadnezzar writing his own biography. And so it's going to be a lot of it in the first person. He wrote this down as a testimony to the one true God. He finally gets converted. It's
So
going to take a
cool.
while. Oh boy. But he writes it down. And then Daniel, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, includes his testimony, his writings, in the middle, sort of a little bit before the middle of the book of Daniel here. So this is where we're going. This is Nebuchadnezzar. And it's, I
Yeah.
mean, buckle your seatbelt because this is a wild ride. One of the
Yeah.
best stories ever.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that running start, because it would feel so strange if you didn't know what you were getting
A little
into.
disjointed. Yeah.
Yeah, extremely. So I'm going to just go through verses 1 through 3 real quickly. Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. Does that not strike you odd, considering everything that this guy is? We'll keep going. I'm sorry. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Again, if you didn't know going into this that this is an autobiography, this is King Nebuchadnezzar now is going to recount something about his own life. I mean, you'd be like, wait, we just ended last chapter with him once again, like going through this very robust and detailed explanation of how he's going to murder all these people who don't do exactly what he wants in some just horrific ways. So now we get to this and it's like, peace be multiplied to you. You know, the Most High God has done these things for me, and, you know, his kingdom's everlasting, his dominion endures from gen. It's like, this doesn't feel like the same guy at all. But there are a couple things that he's probably referencing here, right? How great his signs. He's seen some signs. We went through those over the past couple of weeks. The statue dream, some wonders, rescuing the boys from the fire. That would be wonders. But what's interesting about this is that through all of that, from what we can tell, Mom, Nebuchadnezzar retained his polytheism. So practically, what does that mean here?
Well, you know, we've read before where he has this epiphany, like, your God is the God of all gods. You know, he's
Yeah, he does
wonderful,
this.
and it sounds like he's finally seen the light, and he's got it. But all he's saying in those times prior to this chapter is, of all the little g gods, your God is like the top dog. He's the God over all the little gods. But what he's not saying is he is the only God. He is the one true God. Daniel, I need to know your God. Tell me more about him. He's not there. He's only giving credence to the fact that Daniel's God is superior to all the other gods. So Noelle, I guess the question is, I mean, that's like halfway there. I mean, is that good? Is it good enough?
He recognizes that Daniel's God is God. He also recognizes that he is the best God.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like, not 100% correct, but close enough. We're kind
I
of
mean,
on
should
the
we
right
be
path.
smiling? Yeah, because he's on the path.
Yeah.
You know, like in our society today, you might hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, I believe in God. I believe he created everything. I believe he's the supreme being." And we might go, "Great, we're on the same page." but we're not on the same page unless you and your friend or whoever you're talking to acknowledge that he is the
The
one
only God.
God, the only God, and only he is worthy of all of our worship and all of our praise, that there is no competition with him. That's the only way it works. Well, Nebuchadnezzar has not picked this up yet. And God is about to get his attention. He is about to demonstrate to Nebuchadnezzar, it's not just that I'm better than your gods, it's that your gods don't exist.
Yeah.
And I do.
Absolutely. It's it is noteworthy. Let's just go through verses 4 through 8 real fast here. Nebuchadnezzar, this is still him talking. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. I'm sure he was. I saw a dream that made me afraid. As I lay in bed, the fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers came in. I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me its interpretation. At last, Daniel came in before me, he who is named Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians. I just love he's chief of the magicians. Because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery is too difficult for you, tell me the visions of my dream that I saw and their interpretation. So this is intriguing. Just a couple notes here. Most, if not all, scholars and experts believe that this particular story is happening about 25 years after the fiery furnace incident that we just read
Right.
about. So if we're reading
Big
it,
time span.
yeah, so if you're just reading it sort of from a Western view of this like linear timeline structure, it's like, oh, these must have happened right after each other. They didn't. It's probably about 25 years difference between the two of them. There are two things that are sort of interesting about this. First of all, just the patience and the goodness and the consistency of God in just loving King Nebuchadnezzar and working on him for 25 years through all of this. That's extraordinary. And then also, I mean, Daniel, who is now chief of the magicians, interestingly, the boy just keeps getting promoted. He's doing really well for himself.
Yeah, he is.
Just really, I mean, seriously, just being really faithful. I can't imagine working under somebody like this, having this be my boss. And boss isn't even the right way of thinking about it, because it's not like this was a choice. Like, if I don't like my boss, I can leave my job. Daniel doesn't have that option. He can either work for him or maybe like be killed. As you know, King Nebuchadnezzar is all about that. So, I mean, this is amazing that after 25 years, God's working on him. But it also helps to explain a little bit why, after everything that just happened, he decides to call in his magicians and enchanters and astrologers and Chaldeans. You're like, oh my gosh, we've been through this.
Don't you just wonder? Okay, let's ask our Facebook and our YouTube people. Why do you think that was his go-to? And I mean, I can't wait to hear what you have to say, because this one I'm just scratching my head on. If you were, go ahead and start and comment here. If you were with us the past couple of weeks, then you'll remember that I believe it was Daniel chapter 2, that the king has a dream and he brings all of these guys, these same guys in, and he's like, you have to tell me what the dream was. I'm not going to tell you. And then you have to give me the interpretation. And they can't do it. And he's about ready to just dismember all of them, because that's his go-to. And that's when Daniel steps in and says, no, don't kill these guys. The God of the real God can answer your question, and he can interpret your dream and tell you what it is. So I'm stunned. I'm just stunned that this king would run the same play again. Somebody says, answer is old habits are hard to break.
I don't disagree with that, honestly. As much as I kind of want to go after him for this, it's like, I mean, this is everything he knows. This is his whole religion and everything that he believes. So absolutely. This one's interesting. He knew no difference and went back to what he was used to doing. I think he knew no difference is a really interesting way of putting it. Like, he didn't differentiate between, or at least not really explicitly, he didn't differentiate between what Daniel was doing and the others in his action. And I think that's very possible as well. Old routines and habits are hard to break. This is also interesting. Those around him are expecting him to behave in a certain manner.
That's good.
Hit the like button, or if there's like a raise your hand button if you've ever done something that you realize you're kind of just on autopilot because it's what everybody expects you to do. It's kind of what you've always done. 100%. I also like this. He still has faith in their abilities. He still believes that the magicians and the enchanters and the Chaldeans have power, which is, man, it's wild. But again, if I want to insert myself into it, it's like, well, yup. I can totally see that, going back to these things and, seeing them not work over and over again and continuing to do them. His heart is still far from God.
Yep.
That's evident. This is also good. He still questions what God has proven to him. It's really easy to come up with a lot of explanations as to why something happened or how it's possible, or explain it away. And the other thing is, it's 25 years later. There's evidence that a lot of things have happened in the 25 years, but even at that, I mean, how quickly do you just forget things, and how quickly do you lose that fire? It's the reason that God in the Old Testament sets up so many structures and rituals to help the Jewish people remember what God did for them.
Yes. Good point, Noelle.
It's because then you end up like Nebuchadnezzar.
We forget, don't we?
God provided.
We forget what God has done for us. We forget how he's provided for us. We're just such forgetful humans, aren't we? So anyway, King Nebuchadnezzar, he goes can't teach an old dog new tricks. So back to these guys. And if you remember too, just to kind of review, they didn't just make up off the top of their head interpretations for dreams. They had actually like we would think of a legal library where you have cases from the past that you would go back and research and say, well, this is precedent. They did that for their dreams. So they would catalog dreams. They would, I'm sure, like organize them according to kind and stuff. And then they would follow the people's lives and then record what happened to them after they had these dreams. And that was going to be the interpretation. I'm simplifying, I'm sure, what they did, but that's kind of the nuts and bolts. And so when King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, they would have to reference their annals. Well, they're about to find out that, there's no dream like this dream. And so we got nothing. We can't prove to you that we can interpret
when you have
it.
an unprecedented
dream.
That's
so there you are.
Optimal. Daniel goes in before him. There's an interesting phrase here that I want to point out in verse 8. This is really interesting. It says, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. Mom, talk to us about this, because it's kind of I don't know. I saw it and thought like, oh, it's kind of an interesting thing to say, but didn't think about it much. There's a fair amount of thought about this. What does it mean?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of research on this. Apparently, this can be translated equally well, in whom is the spirit of the holy God, capital H, capital G.
Yeah.
And so you may even be reading from a version right now that does say that, and reading from a good version. The ESV went with the holy gods. Other versions go with the holy God. And the thing is, it's kind of like a 50-50 thing. Like, you kind of go based on context as to how to best translate that. And people are split. Was Nebuchadnezzar still in the mindset of, you're just one of many here? Or as he's reflecting back on it, is he acknowledging that he had the spirit of the holy God in him? Or referring to Daniel's one holy God, even though he didn't believe in it. We just don't know. We don't know. But I just wanted to say that, because you're going to see this phrase again a couple of times, and every time you see it, it could go either way. So,
it's one of the tough things about translating these languages, isn't it? Is that there are some just nuances to it that make it really tough. I also love, though, he has full confidence in Daniel's ability. Like, what are you doing? What have you been up to, bud? Like, we could have saved a whole lot of time. So he brings Daniel in. One other thing, he refers to Daniel as he recounts this whole story, but he makes sure to note that at the time he was referring to him as Belteshazzar. And I think this is really interesting, because we've talked about this before. I think in the very first Daniel study, we talked about how Belteshazzar is a name that honors the god Bel, this pagan, really evil. I mean, it's ultimately a demon. And Daniel's name honors the one true God and puts glory on God. And so anytime he would have heard that name Belteshazzar, it would have been just sort of a slap in the face, because that was not his name, and that's not who he was. It's interesting, though, that because of how Daniel chose to behave, how he interacted with the king, you're going to see some crazy stuff happens. But we know now that, looking back, the king ultimately decided to use Daniel's real name. And I think that just shows the respect that he developed for him and the rapport that was built there. And that doesn't happen accidentally. That doesn't happen haphazardly. I mean, it was so difficult for Daniel to be in this scenario, but he just served faithfully through all of it. So we're going to go through verses 10 through 18 now. And this is a large chunk. I'm going to pop it up on the screen. But what I'd like to do, Mom, is for you to just walk us through the high levels of this, because this is the vision, the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had that freaked him out so badly. And for good reason. I mean, it's kind of it's a pretty frightening dream. You can understand why he gets a little freaked out about what's going on here. So I'm going to put it up on the screen so that we can look at it, but I don't think we should go through every single one of this, or it's going to get lengthy.
I disagree. I think we should. I want to read it. Yeah, I do. But I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to just stop here and there and just give a little tiny bit of clarification or commentary.
Give it to us in chunks.
All right, here we go. Hold on to your hats here. All right, so this is verse 10. The visions of my head as I lay in bed were these. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great, so really tall. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and all the birds of heaven lived in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. Then we go on. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. Okay, so right away we go, okay, what's a watcher? So this is just his way of describing an angelic being. So we have an angelic being coming down. Verse 14, he proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the beast flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, amidst the tender grass of the field. Let him, not it, him be wet with the dew of heaven. So here, I'm just going to insert this. The tree is decimated, but we have a stump left, and we're going to talk in a minute about those bands of iron and bronze. What are those around the stump? And then, as we just said, we're changing now from it, a tree, to personal pronouns like him and his and things like that. So interesting. Almost done here. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Verse 16. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that, I bolded this in mine, the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods, or the holy God, is in you. Okay, so that was a big chunk. But
can you just recap for us, though, what that meant? What was just said to us? Like, high level,
right.
What is he saying?
Right. So,
it feels so disparate.
It does. Well, so he has a dream, big tree. It grows even bigger. It's providing shade and food, and like the whole earth is covered by this tree and everything is happy. And then this angel says, chop it down, but leave the stump, put bands of iron and bronze around it, and then let him be covered with the dew of heaven, and let him eat the grass of the field. So you can see how it starts off, and I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar was like, this is great. And then all of a sudden this tree gets chopped down, and it's, it becomes a he. And I mean, that's terrifying. And so you can see why he would be like, I need help interpreting this, and I need somebody who really, really knows what they're going to do. So he calls in Daniel in verse 19. Let's just read 19, just 19 here. Go ahead, Noelle.
Yeah. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king answered and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. This is really fascinating. And this is why we talked about, there are 3 really key characteristics that every extremely compelling and effective believer demonstrates. And you see all 3 of them here from Daniel. But as I say these, maybe take note of them. And throughout this book, you're going to see these continue coming up. You're going to see them. We already just saw it with the boys in the fiery furnace. You're going to see it further on. But we kind of, again, have to remember where Daniel is. He's serving this wicked king. He's been serving him for likely well over 25 years at this point. This is not an easy place to be. I almost imagine he probably doesn't like the guy a lot. He's not a real likable kind of guy.
He wants to dismember you from time to time. So yeah, probably
Constantly.
not.
I mean, it's just all over the place. And yet he exhibits these three characteristics, and we'll see them throughout the whole thing. Mom, walk us through what the first one is.
Well, I had to stop and just notice Daniel's demeanor. He doesn't immediately tell the king. The king is watching Daniel. He knows Daniel. Daniel has served him for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And he can see that Daniel is visibly upset. He's
Deeply.
shaken up. And to the point that the king says, Daniel, don't worry. Don't worry about this. Just tell me the dream. Don't.
Glib thing to say.
Yeah, which is a kind of an amazing, actually, response to it. But what that showed me is just how merciful Daniel is with this king. I felt so convicted as I really kind of took apart Daniel's reaction and response to how he handles the situation, to think that here's a man who just, well, it was a couple decades ago, but he tried to incinerate Daniel's best friends,
You can't imagine that this is an isolated incident based on everything we've seen.
Daniel himself, was at one point being rounded up to be dismembered by this king. This is not a king who has exhibited grace and mercy towards other people. And it just seems to me that at a given point, Daniel would be like, well, it's about time that God does something. I've had to serve this wicked guy that I can't stand for 25 years, and we're just now getting to the point where he's going to get what's coming to him.
Yeah, and just a quick spoiler, the reason Daniel's dismayed is because this dream is about the king, and it's not good. What's about to happen is going to be very, very, very bad. So he knows that this is awful, and he doesn't have any sort of glee or delight in that, which is, it so shows where his heart is, that he is just incredibly, incredibly merciful.
And how he reflects the heart of God in that. And then there's the next thing he does, though, kind of like balances that out, doesn't it, Noelle?
Yeah, he's honest, which is, we'll even get to this in a moment. I think there's this concept that we can't be both compassionate, or we can't be kind and honest at the same time, that honesty is somehow this just rude and abrupt and aggressive trait. And you see this in Daniel. Not only is he not rude or aggressive, he balances that mercy with honesty, with just really clear truthfulness. Because of that, what you actually end up with is true compassion. Because it wouldn't be nice to lie to him at this point. It wouldn't be a compassionate thing to do. It also would be wrong to be, again, abrupt, glib, gleeful over the situation. So his mercy towards the king is just demonstrated in this sentence, I hope this is not about you. Let this be about your enemies. But then he proceeds to give a really clear and
devastating,
truthful. Yeah, it's devastating news, and you'll see why in a moment. But he's really, really strong about it. He doesn't soften the message, which is true compassion. But then lastly, he's just so respectful to the king. And I think this is a distinct trait from the other two, because this just gets to the desire of Daniel to serve in the capacity that God has put him, and to recognize authority that is placed over him by God, even when that authority is this guy, a not stellar dude. He's just incredibly respectful to the king and gives him all honor that's due him. And I think particularly coming from a very Western, very American, like middle class mindset, it's like, just because you're an authority over me doesn't mean that I have to respect you. You have to earn that respect. And if you're a terrible person, I'm not going to respect you, and I'm not going to treat you with respect. And that's a very standard viewpoint from our culture. It's not how we see Daniel acting here. And you'll never see Daniel acting with disrespect. I don't think that's a cultural thing. I think that is more so a behavior that he has exhibited by the grace of God in order to win over the king. So Daniel is an incredibly compelling witness to the king. That's wild. any Christian that you encounter, any believer in Christ who is just very compelling with their faith, is going to exhibit all three of those characteristics. They're going to be merciful, they're going to be honest, and they're going to be respectful. And those are the things that are required in order to change somebody's mind, which is effectively what Daniel is going to do here. And God more so is going to actually literally change his mind. We'll get, again, sorry to keep saying we'll get there, but you'll see why that's a hilarious statement here in a moment. But in order to soften anybody's heart, it's just critical to not be self-righteous and self-aggrandizing and really rude or abrupt, obnoxious. I hear people all the time, making claims, sometimes Christian, sometimes not, but I know what they're trying to do is change somebody's mind. It's to change somebody's opinion, to change somebody's way of thinking. I'm like, ooh, it's absolutely abhorrent to me that I would ever have my mind changed by somebody who thinks that I'm a moron. And I can't allow somebody who thinks so low of me to have any impact on the way I actually think, and so I won't. And this is what makes Daniel so incredibly effective here, is because at no point is he self-aggrandizing or self-righteous or just delighting in the horror that's about to befall the king. And it's a very countercultural way of behaving, and it's convicting because it's not by any means my natural inclination or my status quo of operation.
For any of us, you're really reflecting the Spirit of God when you behave like this, because it's not human nature to do it. I think we need to go on to verses 20 to 26. Noelle, do you want me to read that big long chunk again?
Let's do it.
All right, here we are.
Chunk, and then we will break it down into the overview. Because once again, we've got just an absolute dearth of information.
Amazing. Okay, so here's the interpretation. Buckle your seatbelt. Here it is. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong so that its top reached to heaven and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. I mean, Daniel nails the entire dream right there, right?
Wow.
Here it is. It is you, O King, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, and let him be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O King. It is a decree of the Most High, which has come upon my Lord the King. Notice the respect here. My Lord the King. Verse 25, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time shall pass over you till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And as it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. So Noelle, we keep talking about 7 periods of time. How long is that?
It's 7 years. It's 7 years. Let me give you the synopsis of what's going to happen. So Nebuchadnezzar is the great tree, that beautiful tree. God is going to chop him down, but not kill him, hence the stump. And then we get this mixing of metaphors. And for 7 years, King Nebuchadnezzar is going to have the mind of an ox. He's going to have the mind of an animal, a bovine, a cow. This is why when I said, Daniel's going to change his mind, and then I sort of joked and said, actually, God's going to literally change his mind. This is what I was referencing. For 7 years, the king is going to have the mind of an ox, and then at the end of the 7 years, he will be reestablished in his right mind, but only after he acknowledges the one true God. And when we see that stump that's sort of encased in the iron and bronze, it's like this protection around that, and pulling that together so that it can be restored at the end of that time. He doesn't completely kill the tree. But we'll get into more of this dream next week, because ultimately what this is talking about is, this is an issue of pride, and this is an issue of God humbling King Nebuchadnezzar, and also just doing something wild to bring him to himself. But this week, what we're just going to land on is actually in verse 27. And this is, I just think this is a beautiful way to wrap it up. Again, this is still Daniel speaking. Everything we know about him. He says, "Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity." One of the things that we see from God quite a lot in the Old Testament actually is that this prophet comes and gives a prophecy of great destruction and, huge punishment, consequences for actions, but always says, listen, turn from your evil, turn from your sin, turn from your unrighteousness, turn back to God. He's going to spare you. He's going to save you. And it's actually sort of what we see here is Daniel saying, listen, king, please listen to me. Break off your sins. Practice righteousness. Show mercy to the oppressed. Maybe God will lengthen your prosperity if you do that. And again, this is why I said, Daniel really is trying to change the mind and the heart of the king, and change the way that he's behaving, and change the way that he is approaching this, because it's, again, he could totally just go in and be like, yeah, this is going to happen to you. It's going to be bad. Bummer. But ultimately he goes, no, I want you to know the true God. I want you to know prosperity. I want you to be prosperous. Be righteous. Stop sinning. Show mercy to the oppressed. And he can say these things. Again, really, this is harsh to go up to anybody and say, hey, quit your wickedness, turn from your sin, be righteous, maybe God will spare you. It's like, oh my gosh, don't, like, you can't say that to people, much less this king. But because Daniel doesn't approach it with that sort of like slap on, he comes at it with such mercy and respect, but just honesty, and just being incredibly candid with the king on what needs to happen. And it's a beautiful reminder on both sides, because in some ways it's like, I'd like to think of myself as Daniel, that I am the one who needs to share with people that they need to break off their sin and be more righteous. It's like probably more so I'm Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll talk about that next week. Like, probably doing any comparison of me to Daniel is just ridiculous and sort of an absurd thing to even talk about. But it's a good note, because anybody who had a right to be self-righteous, it's this guy. But because he is not worried, Daniel's not coming at this from a place of pride of, I've been in this position for all these years and it's been terrible, and now you get your comeuppance. He's coming at it with such humility and such grace that's not, in no scenarios, that's going to be his response. Ultimately, it's a story of pride on all sides. What is it like when you have somebody who is incredibly prideful to a point of being ruinous? And that's Nebuchadnezzar. On the flip side, what does just incredible humility look like? And how does that change the way you interact with people and the way you have a relationship with God? That's Daniel. Goodness, I so want to be Daniel. I so want the problem to be, how can I better call people to righteousness? Probably that's less the issue. It's probably more like, how do I call myself to righteousness? How can I be less prideful so that I can respond the way that Daniel does?
And I think too,
hard.
Just being a vessel for God to just simply flow through, because that's what Daniel is doing here. You can just, it's a man, sure, but what you see here is the heart of God flowing through Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar is getting another glimpse at who God is simply by watching and listening to this servant of his who has such incredible compassion, such incredible honesty, and somehow perfectly marries the two together. And next week, we're going to find out, does that do the trick? Does Nebuchadnezzar say, okay, got it, I don't want to become a bovine? Or does he think, yeah, I think I'll take my chances?
What do you think? Do you think Nebuchadnezzar will somehow begin to show incredible wisdom and grace? No,
You would
maybe
think,
not.
right?
Yeah, I mean, spoiler alerts. We get to
Yeah.
experience the mind of a cow for the next 7 years. Okay, that's the story. We always love doing this with you. We will see you back here next week to finish this up, talk about Nebuchadnezzar. If you've got like the little headers in your Bible, the next header that comes up is Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation. Accurate. That's
That's to
next
put it
week.
mildly.
Yeah, it's gonna be just absolutely incredible. It's a whole situation. We love doing this with you. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, Bible Study Hub, you can join our Facebook group. We do prayer Thursdays, and it's just the best group of people ever, and we love being with you. You can also rewatch these all on YouTube. We stream them live on YouTube. We also have like kind of the cut version on YouTube. Go out there, have a wonderful week, make good decisions. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.